Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have my September TBR. It feels strange to be saying that, and a lot of the books that are in today's video are me getting towards the end of the books that were still on my shelves unread at the end of 2023. This has been a long time coming and I didn't expect to have done this. There have been a lot of unhauls, I can't deny that. There have been books read, books DNF'd, but primarily the books that I unhauled were either books that were given to me by friends, or I borrowed from the charity shop, or I had thought would be for me and then they weren't, such as the Larry McMurtry books. There were 6 or 7 of those books unread, and then I realised through reading Streets of Florida that my taste had entirely changed. Similar, that happened with Cormac McCarthy. Both authors that I had planned on actually reading more of this year and had included on goals lists as authors that I wanted to read more by. But unfortunately, I think that I'm not the reader that I once was, and they're not writing books that they didn't write books that I am interested in anymore. Should that interest be piqued again in future, I could always go back to them, but it was important for me that they didn't languish on my shelves, making me feel guilty and feeling the weight of them as books I had to get through. Then what we have to think about is, even when I've read those books, I still have a few books that I've hauled within the last month that are part of a separate list that won't be getting read until I've read the remainder of the books from my shelves. Then I have all of the Anthony Trollope books to read, and I have my Doctor Who books. So there are still books that didn't make it onto that long list. That was for a number of reasons, one being I didn't want it to be too overwhelming, and the other being that I don't want those to be books that I'm going to be focused on trying to get read within a certain time period. So there was no incentive for me to do that. I wanted to read the books that were on specific shelves. The general fiction, the fantasy fiction, the books that I had been neglecting whilst I got books out of the library and I got books from friends or the charity shop. Since I mentioned reading goals, one of my goals this year was to read Anthony Quinn. So a book that I put on a TBR a few months ago, but then lent to a volunteer, but has made its way back to me, is London Burning by Anthony Quinn. So I just finished Our Friends in Berlin yesterday, and I'm hoping to read this in September. And then we have Molly and the Captain. I remember getting this and getting annoyed because there is a tear on the cover somewhere. I know that much, but I can't remember where it is. This book here is the one that my volunteer has struggled with the most. She has read all of Anthony Quinn in the last few months. I think the reason she didn't like this is because it didn't match up with what she'd seen in his other books, which has been set throughout the 20th century. We have a celebrated artist of the Georgian era paints his 2 young daughters at the family home in Bath. The portrait, known as Molly and the Captain, becomes instantly famous, its fate destined to echo down the centuries, touching many lives. So we have 1889, a young man is painting a line of elms in Kensington. One day he glimpses a mother at play with her 2 daughters and decides to include them in his picture. From that moment he is haunted by dreams that seem to foreshadow his doom. A century later, in Kentish Town, a painter and her grown-up daughters receive news of an ancestor linking them to a long-vanished double portrait of Molly and the Captain. Meanwhile, a friendship with a young musician stirs unexpected passions and threatens to tear the family apart. And I think that it was that dual timeline that my volunteer hadn't liked. So we'll see how I feel about this one. But I will be glad to have read all of the Anthony Quinn books that I own then. And then I think the only book I have left to read of his is Curtain Call, which was his first novel. Continuing with projects, throughout this year I have been reading Elizabeth Taylor. I've read all of her novels. In August I read the first 125 pages worth of stories in the complete short stories of Elizabeth Taylor, and in September I will be reading the next 125 pages until I make it to page 250. But I think that will actually bring me out to page 252. So yeah, and then I'll continue until I finish this book in December. Another short story collection I have to read in September is Maps of Imaginary Towns by S.J. Bradley. This was sent to me by Fly on the Wall Press in exchange for a review, and it says that these short stories traverse the emotional terrain of grief, ambition, and our relationship to technology. You can expect a review for this one before the book's release on the 27th of September. Another project from this year was to read more Anthony Trollope, and I still haven't read The Vicar of Bullhampton at the time of recording, but in September I am planning on reading The Claverings. I have been getting told to read this book for years. It has got to happen in September. This exceptionally hefty book at 480 pages must be read next month. With plans to finish off the books from my shelves, we are going to be getting through a few more authors, and so I have Number 9 Dream by David Mitchell to read. This should be the last book I have to read by this author. I struggled with The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet. This is one that whenever I've started it, I've been put off, and I don't know what it is about it, but let's read the blurb. When 19-year-old Eiji Miyake arrives in Tokyo from backwater Japan to locate the father he has never met, he begins a whirlwind journey that zigzags from reality to fantasy in a chain of extraordinary encounters. But until Eiji has fallen in love and exorcised his childhood demons, the belonging he craves will remain tantalisingly just beyond his grasp. We'll see. David Mitchell has been an author whose works I've really enjoyed for the most part. I can't recall ever disliking anything he's written. I think the reason I struggled with Jacob de Zoet is simply because I didn't want to deal with such a hefty tome when I picked it up. I'm hopeful that I will finish all of the books from my shelves, and that means Jacob de Zoet and Number 9 Dream have got to get read. And then we have a beast of a book. We have 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami, and I do not know who translated this slipcase edition. I decided that I wanted the one that was separated into 3 books, not just because of how it looked, but because I think it'll make it easier for me to read. I am looking forward to it, weirdly. I'm hoping for it to be weird and wonderful and sensational. I have heard Raylene talk about this on the Books Unbound podcast. Many people have talked about this book over the years, and I'm looking forward to finally reading it, especially coming out of enjoying Wild Sheep Chase so much. Yeah, I know I've got some hefty books included, but that's my own fault. I saved the heftier books until the end of this whole reading project. I knew I would. We don't prioritise hefty books anymore. We all talk about this as readers, and I think it comes from this whole thing that we want to have read more books for the end of the year for something in our mind. And I did see somebody mention how they don't count the number of books they've read, they go for a certain number of pages, or another thing they do is reward themselves after a certain number of pages read. And I could definitely see myself implementing something like that just so that I do prioritise the heavier books on my shelves. I'm hopeful that I read all of these books, really, if I find the time and wherewithal to do so. In September, I'm also planning on getting another round of edits done on Mistakes, Me and Murder, and I can see the next few months being incredibly busy. I need to find a new car, I need to get this book out, and my mother wants to go on holiday as well, so there's a whole bunch of things I need to get done. Maybe we can get some books read in the meantime. Indeed, are there any books that you think that I should prioritise over others? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, because until next time, that is all.